Welcome to Crossroads. Trump's 20-point peace plan for Gaza has now been announced. I'll be deep diving into, what's actually in it and what it means. Also, meanwhile, the United States is gearing up for war, and this includes preparations for a potential war, again with the Chinese Communist Party and Venezuela. Also, it's looking like the military is going to be expanding its operations against the drug cartels and traffickers, speaking of Venezuela, and it's actually planning to strike them within the country. We'll be talking about these topics a lot more today, but before we jump into it, don't forget to hit the like button, leave a comment, and be sure to share today's episode. Now look, President Donald Trump met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and Donald Trump announced one big plan, not just to bring an end to the war in Gaza, but to bring peace to the entire Middle East. Watch this.
Everything getting solved. It's called peace in the Middle East. So today is a historic day for peace, and Prime Minister Netanyahu and I have just concluded an important meeting on many vital issues, including Iran, trade, the expansion of the Abraham Accords, and most importantly, we discussed how to end the war in Gaza, but it's just a part of the bigger picture, which is peace in the Middle East, and let's call it eternal peace in the Middle East. So this is far more than anybody expected, but the level of support that I've had from the nations in the Middle East and surrounding Israel and neighbors of Israel has been incredible, incredible. Every single one of them.
Now, from what he's saying, this is a regional peace deal, something to bring peace in the long term, not just short term. Now, that includes part of the Abraham Accords also, negotiated during Trump's first term in office, which was, of course, a peace deal between Israel and other Arab countries like Saudi Arabia. Also on that front, many of those countries came out with a public letter, and they support it. This could actually bring peace to that entire region. Now, Epoch Times said this, a few more details. President Donald Trump unveiled a new 20-point proposal for bringing the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict in the Gaza Strip to a close. And as the plan states, quote, once all hostages are returned, Hamas members who commit to peaceful coexistence and to decommission their weapons will be given amnesty. It says members of Hamas who wish to leave Gaza will be provided safe passage to receiving countries. We'll see which countries decide to take members of Hamas. But it notes the plan describes the proposed transitional Gaza government as a, quote, technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee responsible for delivering the day-to-day running of public services and municipalities for the people in Gaza. Digging into this a bit, the technocratic part is interesting because, of course, technocracy refers to a form of government mainly through technology and big corporations. It's not quite clear what they mean by technocratic. Will that be a surveillance state? Will that be a smart city? We don't know. They also talk about an apolitical Palestinian committee that will basically, handle the basic resources, basic operations. In other words, at least during the transition, Gaza will not have a government. It's going to have a committee in charge basically of just keeping the place running. Now, I know it's further in. According to a readout of the peace plan, the transitional government will remain in place over Gaza until the Palestinian Authority has reformed itself sufficiently to assume control over the territory. In terms of what that means, the Palestinian Authority reforming itself sufficiently, presumably that means like de-radicalizing. An important piece to remember, Hamas is technically the democratically elected government there. The Palestinian Authority actually comes out of another terror group earlier on with the Yasser Arafat, and also was heavily tied to the Chinese Communist Party. Also, right before Hamas launched this attack on Israel, back on October 7th, way back now, the Palestinian Authority leaders actually went and met with Chinese Communist Party leadership. They're very closely tied. So it does seem that in order for them to assume control over Gaza, they need to, quote unquote, reform themselves. And we don't yet know what that means. Now, notes further in, the readout did not specify exactly what reforms the Palestinian Authority must commit to before assuming the governing responsibilities in the Gaza Strip. I assume it's going to be some kind of de-radicalization thing where they can't have like intermingling with Hamas or something like that. It is a tribal area. There are many tribes there, and they don't get along with each other, so it's very complicated. Now, notes another point stipulated in the plan is that, quote, no one will be forced to leave Gaza, and those who leave the war-torn territory, quote, will be free to do so and free to return. That was a big debate also. There were reports that they were basically going to evict almost everybody in Gaza. They're now saying they are not going to do that. They're not going to take every person there and move them somewhere else. There were some groups pushing for that. According to this plan, that's not going to be the way it goes. People can leave if they want to. They can go back if they want to. They can stay if they want to. And it looks like a lot of changes are going to be happening there. The way this will likely work is effectively a long-term occupation of Gaza, the outside control of its government through this technocratic, basically committee running things, and a movement, it seems, to, I don't know what they're going to do to the Palestinian Authority to reform them, but someone is going to have to oversee the reform. The details on this we don't yet know. It does seem, though, that there is broader support for this. Even Saudi Arabia, other Arab countries, this is a very tough point for a lot of those countries, but them supporting this plan is actually a big deal. It does look like it's going to go forward, and it looks like, well, it may actually work. Meanwhile, the United States is also gearing up for war, in addition to ending wars, getting involved in new ones. And this includes preparations for a potential war with the Chinese Communist Party. Gearing up for it. I'll be talking more about this after we come back from a quick break.
All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment. You are, of course, watching Crossroads with Joshua Philipp. I'm just here to share a message about American Hartford Gold, my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. Now, obviously, the recent tariffs have made the markets super turbulent and volatile. With every new piece of tariff news, the markets seem to either crash up or crash down. And of course, it's worth mentioning that these conditions don't only affect Wall Street. They affect all of us through our investments and our retirement accounts. That's why I'd like to introduce you to a company that I trust and I myself use to secure my own savings, American Hartford Gold. They specialize in helping Americans move our assets into something tangible, into something you can actually hold, which is physical gold and physical silver, two precious metals that act as a hedge against all those decisions being made in Washington, D.C. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. They have thousands of 5-star reviews, and they make the whole buying process super simple. Your metals can be shipped directly to your door, or you can transfer your current retirement account to a tax-advantaged gold IRA. And the best part is that right now, American Hartford Gold is offering an exclusive offer. When you call them today and you mention the name Joshua, you could receive up to $15,000 in free silver with your initial investment. Take advantage of their special offer. You can either just call them at 877-260-2764 or text Joshua to 65532. All their information will also be down in the description box below. And now, back to Crossroads.
Welcome back. The United States is gearing up for war, and this includes preparations for potential war with the Chinese Communist Party. Wall Street Journal said this. It says the Pentagon, alarmed at the low weapons stockpiles the U.S. would have on hand for a potential future conflict with China, is urging its missile suppliers to double or even quadruple production rates on a breakneck schedule. It says the push to speed production of the critical weapons in the highest demand has played out through a series of high-level meetings between Pentagon leaders and senior representatives from several U.S. missile makers, according to people familiar with the matter. And it's a Deputy Defense Secretary, you can call it the Secretary of War now, but Defense Secretary Steve Feinberg is taking an unusual hands-on role in the effort called the Munitions Acceleration Council. And it notes it calls some company executives weekly to discuss it, some of the people said. Now, this is important, actually, because there were actually reports U.S. weapons stockpiles were running low. Now, a lot of that was because we were sending so many armaments to Ukraine to fight its war against Russia. Again, under the Biden administration, the supplying of weapons and missiles and everything else to Ukraine was draining our supplies. Also, the supplying of them to Israel. Now, on that point, the big problem you had get named, when Biden was president, is that they were not necessarily replacing the weapons that we were giving away. As we were giving them to other countries, we weren't renewing our stockpiles. And there actually was a report that came out towards the end of the Biden administration, and it was pretty shocking. It said that if the United States were to go to war with China right now as we speak, we might lose. Not because we're not capable of fighting, but because we lack the resources and wartime production. We gave away all of our factories. We offshored everything. We're dependent on them for rare earth minerals, and we don't have enough armaments or shipbuilding capability. The Trump administration is trying to rebuild all of that. They're trying to make America, again, a new manufacturing hub for the whole world. They're trying to bring the factories back. They're trying to do domestic operations for rare earth minerals, also decentralizing it, looking at other countries, even working with Australia, doing new mines in many different countries. And a big part of that also is trying to get back shipbuilding capabilities. Right now, the CCP, they can build massive amounts of warships. We cannot. It's very slow here. And we need to fix that if we're going to, be able to defend ourselves as a country. Now, look, speaking of Russia also, because it does look like Trump is looking to continue supporting Zelensky in the war, Russia is also allegedly working with the Chinese Communist Party on its plans to invade Taiwan. Epoch Times said this: a trove of leaked Russian documents analyzed by a London-based defense institute suggests Moscow is supplying Beijing with equipment, technology, and training that could bolster the Chinese regime's ability to mount airborne operations, capabilities analysts say could be applied to an attack on Taiwan. It's the Royal United Services Institute's, the RUSI's, analysis is based on approximately 800 pages of contracts, equipment lists, and correspondence obtained from the Black Moon Hacktivist Group. Basically what that means is hacker activists. There used to be groups like Anonymous and things like that. Basically just people on the internet who go and steal things and hack things as a form of activism. It says the materials, which date from 2023 to late 2024, according to the report's authors, describe plans to transfer a complete set of weapons and systems to equip an airborne battalion, as well as specialized parachute systems and a training program for operators and technicians in Russia and China. Plans, in other words, to have some kind of airborne raid, dropping troops down, and who knows what else. Now, on that point, were the Chinese Communist Party to try to take Taiwan, a lot of people talk about what it would look like on the water. And of course, that would be accompanied by airborne operations as well. The problem the Chinese Communist Party has with airborne operations, it makes claims about having like a 5th generation fighter jet. It does not. Even based on normal analysis of just basic parts, it does not. The J-20 is not a 5th generation fighter jet. It doesn't meet the basic stipulations you would have. You would need to meet that standard. They still buy their engines from Russia. They still cannot build modern-day jet engines. And so right now the Chinese Communist Party, its military, I've said it before, I'll say it again, they're less capable than Russia. The training, a lot of it came from the Soviets. They still use Soviet-style training, which is basically follow orders absolutely. Don't question orders, even if they make no sense. Don't think for yourselves, and that's how they fight. Also, the Chinese military is made in China, and as we saw, the made in China tires going flat was what also stalled Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which stalled the entire thing. And we've also seen about how well the Russians fight in Ukraine. Not significantly well. The Chinese Communist Party is less capable than Russia. The biggest problem we have with the Chinese Communist Party's military, though, is there's a lot of them, and they have a lot of production capability. They have a lot of people, and they have the ability to build a lot of weaponry. In particular, rockets, missiles, and those types of things. When many analysts talk about the real threat of, for example, the Chinese invasion of Taiwan, it would be the rocket bombardments and the missile bombardments. That would be the biggest thing that would be really just detrimental. And so on their side, production, wartime production would be their strong point, and the number of people they could throw at a conflict. But in terms of capabilities, training, logistics, it's a mess. But they are training right now. Now on that point also, Russia and the CCP, they have a no limits agreement still in place. Russia also has a defensive agreement with North Korea, which says that a war for either country is a war for both. If one of them goes to war, so does the other. Currently, Russia is at war with Ukraine. Technically, so is North Korea. North Korea is sending arms and troops. They are actually fighting in Ukraine. The bigger issue is if maybe North Korea gets pulled into a conflict with South Korea, will Russia also get involved? Currently, the South Korean government is very concerned about that. They're actually sending envoys and trying to talk to Russia about that, trying to even break that agreement. And also, if China invades Taiwan, there is a real possibility that North Korea could invade South Korea, pulling Russia into that conflict as well, which would be, as a regional power, would be in the interests of the CCP. They would want to have Russia present if they were to get involved in a war, especially because of air power. Because Russia is better than the CCP in terms of air power still. Again, we'll see where this goes, but also, speaking of Russia, it looks like they're also planning for a long war. This is not going to end anytime soon. The Moscow Times said this: Russian President Vladimir Putin on Monday ordered the conscription of 135,000 men by the end of 2025, the largest conscription drive in 9 years. It says during the autumn 2016 intake, Putin ordered the conscription of 152,000 men. In the 3 years since Russia began its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, it has drafted an average of 127,000 men every fall. It's not a huge jump, but it is higher. And, one of the problems they're having right now is, frankly, they're kind of running out of young men to throw into that war. One of the reasons, notably, why they're bringing in people from North Korea to fight. It notes this, though: Russia's spring 2025 draft called up 160,000 men, the highest since autumn 2011. It notes that Russia holds biannual conscription drives with men aged 18 to 30 eligible for 1 year of mandatory service. In Russia, you have no choice but to join the military on that front. Now, on that point also, though, Trump is working more with Volodymyr Zelensky in Ukraine, and he said that he believes Ukraine can potentially win the war against Russia. It looks like the United States is going to continue backing up Ukraine. It looked a bit dicey for a bit in terms of whether Trump was going to maintain that. It's back on the table. Trump says he believes Ukraine can win the war. And very likely that means with heavy U.S. backing. Now, also on top of all of this, the U.S. military is looking to expand its operations against the drug cartels and the traffickers, and also now potentially planning strikes into Venezuela. We're actually going to be carrying out strikes potentially into Venezuela, within their country. NBC News said this: U.S. military officials are drawing up options to target drug traffickers inside Venezuela, and strikes within the country's borders could potentially begin in a matter of weeks. 4 sources told NBC News. Anonymous sources, take it as you will, but it does seem to be fairly credible based on where things are heading. It notes those sources are 2 U.S. officials familiar with the planning and 2 other sources familiar with the discussions. It says they spoke on the condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to discuss the plans publicly. Problematic, by the way, because the last thing you want to do when you're going to launch a war is leak it to the press. Somebody's leaking something they should not be leaking. But it notes this: it says striking inside Venezuela would be another escalation in the Trump administration's military campaign against alleged drug targets and its stance towards Venezuela's government. I should note, they make it sound like Trump is doing this. The Biden administration actually started that designation. It was actually the Biden administration, not Trump, that named Maduro as the leader of the Cartel of the Suns. It was also the Biden administration that recognized the government in exile as the official government of Venezuela, not the one currently in power under Maduro. Trump has maintained the stance that was set in place by the Biden administration. The difference, though, is that they're launching strikes on drug traffickers. We've seen, for example, the many strikes on boats allegedly being run by gangs like Tren de Aragua and things of that sort. It notes this: in recent weeks, the U.S. military struck at least 3 boats from Venezuela allegedly carrying narco traffickers and drugs that could threaten Americans, President Donald Trump said on Truth Social. And of course, we've seen some of the videos of that. You've had many different traffickers, again, bringing drugs from Venezuela into other parts of Latin America, and they're getting blown up. I can tell you, it is understood that what you're seeing on the surface is the tip of the iceberg. A lot more is going on in Venezuela and against these drug cartels and traffickers than the public is being told. I can tell you this, but just saying it is understood that this is the case. The U.S. military is actually launching some pretty broad operations against drug traffickers currently. Also, meanwhile, the U.S. military is holding a massive meeting of commanders. In fact, just this morning, President Trump was speaking about this, speaking to military commanders, and basically describing the new U.S. military, what we were, what we've become, what's changing. NBC News said this right ahead of this. It said President Donald Trump, in an interview with NBC News on Sunday, confirmed that he planned to attend an unusual meeting organized by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Secretary of War, they're calling him still Defense Secretary, that will gather hundreds of senior military officers near Washington on Tuesday. And Trump said it's really just a very nice meeting talking about how well we're doing militarily, talking about being in great shape, talking about a lot of good, positive things. It's just a good message, Trump told NBC News in a phone call and added, quote, "We have some great people coming in and it's just an esprit de corps." You know the expression esprit de corps, that's all it's about. We're talking about what we're doing, what they're doing, and how we're doing. And as that Hegseth last week summoned hundreds of senior military leaders who are stationed all over the world to Washington for a meeting of the Pentagon's top brass. You don't see this happen very often. Basically called in most, I don't know if all, but most of the U.S. military's top commanders for this giant meeting they're having right now. It notes the event will be held at Quantico Marine Corps Base in Virginia, about 30 minutes south of Washington. The base will host potentially thousands of military members, including the top brass, their aides, and their security. Again, that's taking place this morning. And in terms of what Trump was talking about as of this morning, he was basically talking about how well they're doing with recruitment, the problems the military has been facing over the years, how he's changed a lot of that. It does look like most of the meeting, in terms of what Trump is saying, in terms of his public speech, most of the meeting was more about kind of the successes that Trump has made, in terms of bringing back the war-fighting nature of the U.S. military, the shift from being the Department of Defense to the Department of War, the cultural changes, and a lot of other things. Now, part of that might be to just raise troop morale, to kind of nail things down and say, this is what we were, this is what we are now. They did fire a lot of people. They removed a lot of people. Pete Hegseth, one of the culture changes he's been bringing about as the Secretary of War, formerly known as the Secretary of Defense, one of the big changes he's brought about is he's trying to give more power to the enlisted man, a little less power to the commanders. There is a cultural difference between officers and the enlisted troops. Anybody who's been in the military knows this very well. While there are many good officers, some of them are viewed more as like politicians, and some of them, they want to rise through the ranks. There's a bit of a different culture sometimes, in some cases. I wouldn't say it's across the board, but in some cases, between them and the regular troops. And Pete Hegseth is kind of regarded as representing the just boots on the ground. One of the things notably that some tried using to block him from being appointed as the Secretary of War, he's not coming in as like a 4-star general, right? The culture he represents is very different. And so there has been a very large culture change within the military. Now also, remember that President Trump, speaking of which, brought back the old name of the Department of War. Technically, the name Department of Defense is still there, but they've brought about an alternative name that they can use, the Department of War. And remember, alongside that, they noted this is not just a name change. America will now take a more offensive approach, not just defense. Anybody who's played sports knows if you're only playing defense, you will lose eventually. You need to have an offense and a defense. And if you're not having an offensive stance, you're not going to fight well. And so the military is going to do a bit of both now. Now, on another topic, also new details are coming out on one of the big mysteries around January 6th and the protests, the pipe bombs. Who put the pipe bombs in Washington? What was going on with that? It's still unsolved. In Just the News, they actually received new documents on that investigation. Here's what they said. They said the unsolved case of 2 pipe bombs planted at the major political party's headquarters in Washington, D.C. before the January 6, 2021 Capitol riot, the protests, is facing new mystery after FBI Director Kash Patel transmitted to Congress the lab analysis and interviews with a key witness who is challenging the official timeline of events. Everything might have changed. Now, just an important note on the pipe bombs. The original charge many of the J6ers were facing was disrupting an official proceeding. Their actions being accused of stopping Congress, not even stopping, just delaying a little bit. From counting the Electoral College votes, they still did it by the end of that day, despite everything. Technically, what stopped it or stalled it was the pipe bombs. The pipe bombs were actually what stalled it. And the pipe bombs kind of set everything else in motion. The pipe bombs were what canceled the planned events at the Capitol. The pipe bombs were kind of threw everything into disarray. Because remember, what was Trump actually planning to do on January 6th? The actual plan was they had speakers set up to go to the Capitol building and speak there. They had the permits for it. They had a stage set up for it. Everything was organized for it. There was supposed to be a speaking event there. And what was also going to happen, which Trump was talking about on social media before they deleted everything and then accused him otherwise, what he actually said he wanted to do on January 6th is that members of Congress, when they were, again, going over the Electoral College votes, they were going to present all of the alleged evidence of election fraud in front of the entire world. That's what was supposed to happen on January 6th. The thing that derailed all of that canceled the events, that set everything else into motion, was the pipe bombs. The pipe bombs are the most important part of this entire story. And they can track down, like a 80-year-old woman waving a little American flag, but they can't find the guy who left 2 pipe bombs in Washington, D.C. at 2 of the main political hubs. Interesting, right? But here's what we know about it now. It says the documents obtained by Just the News show that both bombs, one planted at the Democratic National Committee and the other at the Republican National Committee, being done in such a way that they would have represented a threat to both political parties, meaning it was not partisan, it was on both sides. Why would they do that? It says they were filled with chemical building blocks of black powder. Each was equipped with a 60-minute kitchen timer, and each had destructive potential, meaning these were real bombs, apparently. But it notes most notably, the FBI laboratory report never uses the word viable to describe either bomb, which is very, very interesting. In other words, it's suggesting they had the parts and all the components to actually be explosive devices, but they might not have been set up in a way that was viable to actually function as explosive devices. And notice that both devices never exploded and were discovered about 16 hours after the FBI claimed they were planted outside both major party headquarters. And further on it states this: the documents turned over by Kash Patel, the head of the FBI, to the House Judiciary Committee and its special January 6 investigative subcommittee also raise questions about that timeline. It says they include interviews with a key witness who said the RNC, the Republican National Committee device, still had 20 minutes remaining on its timer when she discovered it the following day. But it says that witness raised the possibility that at least the RNC pipe bomb was planted just before it was discovered and not the night before, as the FBI claimed. Very, very strange, right? It says the mystifying evidence now has congressional investigators exploring stunning new theories. Remember, these are theories, not facts, and so we'll see what the facts are when they come out. But it says these theories include whether the bombs were made to look real but not to explode, to create a diversion during the Jan 6 protests, or whether someone came back and set the timer later on, or both, on one or both of the devices. Basically, the plot has thickened, and we don't have clear answers on what is going on with it. But I will add again, the pipe bombs are one of the core pieces of the entire story of January 6th, and it's one of the most important pieces that we still don't have the answers to. Now, also on another topic, there's a big shakeup coming to Hollywood, and this could actually see Hollywood films getting hit with 100% tariffs if they do not film their movies in the United States. If they go to other countries, work with other countries, give them our money, well, they're going to get hit with tariffs. Trump said this on Truth Social. He said, "Our movie-making business has been stolen from the United States of America by other countries, just like stealing candy from a baby." He says California, with its weak and incompetent governor, who criticized Trump back after Trump said this, has been particularly hard hit. He said, "Therefore, in order to solve this long time never-ending problem, I will be imposing a 100% tariff on any Trump." That's a big deal, by the way. It basically means if a film wants to be filmed outside the United States and they want to get shown within the United States, they're going to get hit with a 100% tariff. And that's a big deal because a lot of movies are filmed outside the United States. I'm not just talking about foreign films like, South Korea has a big film industry, India has a big film industry. Not just that, but also Hollywood being forced to work with the foreign governments on some films. Hollywood actually does film a lot of its movies in other countries. It's not clear how that's going to work, like if they have to film the entire movie in the United States, especially if they want to do location shots. But there's also a lot of foreign pressure that kind of forces Hollywood to do this. The Chinese Communist Party is one of the biggest pieces with this. The way the CCP plays the whole film game, the Chinese Communist Party has deeply gained control over Hollywood, deeply influences Hollywood. The way they did it is they say that basically they only let a handful of movies into China, and so films have to compete to get into China. If they get the Chinese market, they make a lot more money. If they do not get it, it can mean the difference of making a profit or having a loss. If they want to get into China, there are several requirements. They cannot show the Chinese Communist Party in a negative light. They cannot show the U.S. military in a positive light. They have to co-produce their films, oftentimes the Chinese Communist Party studios. They have to have one scene filmed in China. They have to have a Chinese actor or actress. A lot of things like this. They also have to have films that represent what the CCP calls core socialist values, and they have to have their movies represent Communist Party thought, under Xi Jinping thought, if they want to have their movies shown in China. And because the CCP is not super detailed on what the rules are, films oftentimes overcompensate and compete to get into China, which makes the bar higher and higher in terms of lower and lower, I guess you could say, in terms of how far they have to go in order to appease the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party has also gained control, buying up talent houses, buying up production studios, buying up different parts of Hollywood, and has largely gained control over Hollywood. Now, breaking that influence would be a big deal. We'll see if tariffs are enough to do that, because really, this doesn't uproot the CCP's influence over Hollywood. It just makes it more expensive if they film their movies outside of the United States. They could easily just film it in the United States or just pay the tariff. We don't know yet. Also on that front, though, Trump set in motion some big efforts on Hollywood, and he wanted to bring about a new golden age, as he called it. You might remember back in January, Trump appointed actors Sylvester Stallone, Mel Gibson, and Jon Voight as, quote, special ambassadors to Hollywood. We've not really seen them do much, at least not on the surface, in terms of what that special ambassador role actually is. But Trump said that was part of an effort to bring about a new golden age of Hollywood, as he called it. Bringing back Hollywood, making Hollywood great again, as he said. We haven't really seen it. We haven't really seen it. Actually, the film industry in the United States right now is actually changing quite a bit. Hollywood is being decentralized. A lot of the more conservative studios are actually moving to other states. A lot are going to Nashville, actually. There's a big movement now going to Nashville. Some are going to other areas. And you have essentially a decentralized film industry starting up. Angel Studios is doing very well with this. Mel Gibson is producing his own films. Notably, some people have criticized Trump's move with these tariffs, suggesting that Mel Gibson's Passion of Christ 2 is filmed outside the United States. And so will Mel Gibson get hit with tariffs because of that? We'll have to see. On that front, the film industry is changing. The issue is you're not going to see that reflected for a few years. It does take a few years for a film to get made, and most of the films still being released were things they started a few years ago when the culture was very different and when the industry was in a very different state. Very likely within the next maybe 2 years or so, you'll start seeing a very different type of film emerging in the United States. That said, questions, comments, anything you want to talk about, leave it in the chat. Let's jump into a discussion. So first off, Martin McKenzie, you're saying, we could have cultivated a better relationship with Russia back in the 90s. We could have brought them into the Western sphere. What happened? Yeah, I've heard a lot of analysis on this. So what happened in the 90s? Well, 89, the collapse of the Soviet Union began, right? The Berlin Wall fell. We all, I guess not all of us these days, some of us got to watch it on television. I was a little kid at the time. I remember the adults being very excited about it because many of us remember, the threat of nuclear war was really serious back then. I remember being terrified when adults talked about nuclear war. It was horrifying. And the reality of the Cold War was it felt like there was just a bomb hanging over your head at every moment. It was a very rough time, very scary time for the world. And the United States did win, at least against the Russians. We brought our guard down, and the Chinese Communist Party basically replaced what the Soviet Union was, and we paid for it. We basically built the noose to hang ourselves. Now, in terms of Russia, though, I would actually agree we could have done much better. This is the problem that happened with modern Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union, as it's been explained to me. Now, first off, remember the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was not just Russia. It was the entire Soviet bloc. Okay, let's put it this way. What were the power structures in the Soviet Union? Basically, the Communist Party and everybody else. The only people who had money, the only people who had power were members of the Communist Party. In other words, your party leadership, the secret police, and so on. When the Soviet Union fell, where did all those rich people go? Basically, they became the oligarchy. Because, what happens? Like, imagine this, all right? You're living in a country where everyone is dirt poor, they're waiting in bread lines. That's the majority of your population. The only people with money are the people puppeteering the whole scene, right? The Communist Party leadership, the secret police, and those types of folks. What happens when the government changes, but you don't prosecute the criminals? What happens when the government changes, but you don't have the end of World War II? There was a denazification movement. They had trials. They hanged a lot of the former Nazi leadership. We never saw a movement like that holding the communist parties to account. You had genocidal regimes, brutal regimes, and nobody was ever brought to justice for it. With the exception of some countries where they did actually kill the former Communist Party leaders when they overturned the Soviet Union. With very few exceptions, the people who ran the show stayed in power. And here's how that worked. You go directly from being a communist dictatorship, a totalitarian communist state, to being a free market economy. What does that mean? It means everything goes up for sale. Land goes up for sale, real estate goes up for sale, resources go up for sale. Who has the money to buy all that stuff? Well, the former Communist Party leadership, right? And so what happened was the former Communist Party leadership, businesses go up for sale, land goes up for sale, real estate goes up for sale, resources go up for sale, the only people with money were the former Communist Party leaders. They buy everything. And so they go directly from being under these, totalitarian leaders to still being under these totalitarian leaders who just bought up all the resources. Because they didn't prosecute them. They never held them to account. The other thing you found is a lot of the Soviet bloc leaders actually just joined the United Nations. Unfortunately, that is the case. This has been pointed out not just by me, but by many politicians throughout Europe, including many in Poland. I've even read some of their books on it. A lot of them just went directly into the United Nations or into the European Union. And so, unfortunately, those local governments were kind of infiltrated, you could say, by the former Communist Party leadership who just went from one system of government to another. They stayed in power, in other words. In addition to that, you had the forming of the oligarchy, you had the infiltration of the new governing bodies of Europe, basically maintaining the Soviet bloc just under a different name. And then you had another problem, which is a lot of the police and the secret police and all those guys, they just became the mafia. They joined the mafia. And so for a lot of these people who, used to make a living monitoring people, torturing people, abusing people, they just made a business out of it and they became the criminal bodies. They got into drug trafficking, they got into sex trafficking, they got into really terrible crimes, and they're still just professional killers, just under a different label. None of them were held to account. And so unfortunately, that's what happened. That's what happened with the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now, could the United States have stopped that? In order to stop that, in my opinion, the only way you could have stopped that would be if you held all the former Soviet leaders to account. If you did to them the same thing that happened to the Nazis after the end of World War II. You put them on trial, you execute them if they carried out crimes against humanity, you put them on trial, you throw them in prison, you hold every one of them to account, down to the prison guards, down to the guy who did the taxes for the regime. Everybody who worked for the regime stands trial and faces punishment for the crimes they committed against the people of that country. That's the only way they could have prevented it. Nobody was ever held to account. Full-scale genocides, nobody was ever blamed for it. Nobody faced justice for it. Nothing happened. And because nothing happened, basically most of them stayed in power. Most of them stayed in power. And then went on to influence politics abroad, unfortunately. And then the CCP just replaced, the Chinese Communist Party just replaced what the Soviet Union was in terms of the global communist movement. Nothing changed, actually, unfortunately. Ashley from California, you're saying if Trump can curtail the control the cartels have in not just the U.S., but in North and South America too, wouldn't that severely limit the influence the CCP has over there? Who would push their fentanyl on U.S. citizens then? It would significantly impact the operations of the Chinese Communist Party. It would actually cut off a lot of the funding to global terrorism as well. Okay, does anybody remember post 9/11, the anti-drug commercials? Who remembers when they were saying that if you do drugs, you're supporting terrorism? Does anybody remember that narrative? They were saying, if you smoke marijuana, you support terrorism. They weren't actually, it's again, the whole anti-drug campaign was a little cringy sometimes, but it was true. It actually was true. A lot of these countries, they're not just influenced by the Chinese Communist Party. Iran has a lot of influence in Latin America. They have actual political parties for Hezbollah in some countries, including Peru, for example. There's a Hezbollah political party. In Brazil, Iran has huge influence, huge influence. And you even have Hezbollah branches in Mexico, even in Tijuana. I've been told this, in fact, by people who used to work in the services that would know this is taking place. Just put it that way. I've actually done several interviews on this. I was even told by someone who was very much in the know that they even had Hezbollah training camps in parts of Mexico, that Hezbollah was working with the drug cartels, including teaching them tunnel building and IEDs, improvised explosive devices. And, we see where that's gone now. And so, yeah, the problem is the drug trade kind of works as a black market money-making machine, not just a tool, a weapon of war against the United States, killing more Americans every year than a full-scale war. It also represents a money-making system for the Chinese Communist Party, for gangs that are corrupting governments all throughout Latin America and in America. And also, of course, financing terrorist operations. It is one of the big money makers for global terrorism, and Iran, notably. And so, yeah, if Trump were to actually dismantle those networks, if Trump were to dismantle the cartels, the problem you have is the culture of criminality in some of these countries where you do have narco culture, and it's very prevalent. To disincentivize people from getting involved in crime would be very hard. But, a lot of these countries are basically destabilized because of gangs. Because there's so much crime, good, law-abiding citizens can barely get by. If you're not dishonest, if you're not somewhat corrupt, if you don't play the game a little bit, you don't really have a lot of chance of survival, at least, especially not in politics in many of those countries. And so the problem they have to deal with is not just the issue of cartels directly, but also just the absolute decay of criminality throughout a lot of those countries. The gangs, the violence, the human trafficking, everything else. When I was down in Panama, when I was investigating the border crisis and what was fueling it, and I went down to the mouth of the Darien Gap. I remember talking to a lot of people from Honduras, and they were telling me, Honduras, Guatemala, I was talking to a lot of Venezuelans. The people I talked to, from there all the way up to the U.S.-Mexico border were saying that their countries were just basically unlivable because of gangs. You have gangs that have destroyed their countries, that have corrupted the government, that make it so the average citizen is just being terrorized constantly. The problem of gangs is horrible there. And the problem is we've imported a lot of these people. The gangs have come too, which are a lot of what we see in terms of the problems. The culture of gangs within Latin America is terrible. It makes a lot of these countries that would otherwise be wonderful, beautiful places with great food, by the way, into really difficult places to live. So we'll see. What I'm saying is we'll have to see how far Trump goes with it. If he just eliminates the drug cartels, if he only goes after the drug operations, it's not going to fix the problems entirely. He would also need to do something to root out corruption and the corruption the gangs have represented within the politics in many of these countries. Because, the real way they would have to solve the problem of crime is frankly a lot like what you see being done in El Salvador, where they just go after all the gangs with brute force, and if you're part of a gang, you're treated like a terrorist. You're treated like you're in Guantanamo Bay. Nothing short of that will save Latin America. Nothing short of that will get rid of the problems they have. Because anything short of that will allow the gangs to continue to threaten politicians, threaten judges, terrorize the average citizen, and basically establish many empires through the use of criminality, backed up by foreign governments, including the Chinese Communist Party. So we'll see what happens. On that point also, a lot of countries in Latin America, they used to be great, they used to be really wonderful countries. Venezuela was one of the top rising economies in the world before they brought in socialism. A lot of these countries were wonderful. They were great places to live, and they've just been decayed from the inside down to the bone by cartels and gangs and bad socialist policies, which often goes hand in hand with that stuff. California gal, you're saying, with the Hollywood film industry being so liberal, do we want to try to get their business here? Good question. Okay, so you're actually seeing a bit of a change in Hollywood. And part of that, I think, is because of the demands of the market. Now, look, we all watched what happened with our favorite actors not being able to continue working in Hollywood. We've seen that a lot of them, if they come out as conservative or Christian or anything like that, it used to be they kind of got blacklisted. You have guys like Mel Gibson who are kind of forced out of the main body of Hollywood. But look where they're at now. They're doing very well on their own. You've also had a lot of actors come out because of the social pressure and just state, that they believe in God, that they're conservative, and it stopped being as controversial as it used to be within those spheres. I would say that Hollywood is actually now undergoing a culture change, partly because of the way the country has changed, but also because of the markets. Because what else did we see? Disney will make a big movie, they'll pour tons of money into it, they'll then put in DEI policies or other crazy policies, and people don't watch it. People just don't watch it. They do crazy things with how they film it, they shove narratives into it, and people just don't watch the movies. And what happens then is you have massive box office failures. They're going to go out of business if they don't change it, and they're starting to realize it. And so they are changing a lot. And we also saw them run a few really good series into the ground. One great series, the first 2 seasons at least, The Mandalorian on Disney Plus. The first 2 seasons were really good. And then they fired Gina Carano, who was one of the actresses in it, because she made some statements. What she actually said, because the media framed it ridiculously. What she actually said was that if you start labeling people as enemies, eventually this will lead to violence against them. She was right. Look at what happened to Charlie Kirk. She was absolutely right. Look at how people who are Christian or conservative are being targeted and killed. Look at how many of the labeling movements have in fact led to people being radicalized to violence. Gina Carano was absolutely right, but she was fired by Disney for saying that. And she only recently just settled with them over that. After she left that show, the show just went downhill, just went down the drain. I mean, I don't know if she could have saved it, but you saw a lot of that happen. And so you are starting to see a shift in Hollywood where they're starting to remove scenes like, there have been some cases where they've removed homosexual themes. There have been cases where they've chosen to not race swap the main actors. There have been cases where reportedly, again, according to media sources, in terms of the Hollywood reporting type sphere, they say that they've even edited out some political themes. They're becoming less on the surface with their narratives. And a lot of that is because people just don't watch the movies. Now, the problem Hollywood also faces, frankly, is just bad writing. When was the last time you saw a movie with actual good writing? And it's going to get, I don't know if it's going to get worse or better with AI. I don't like AI, but AI might be able to write a better movie than some of these crazy people they've been hiring to write their movies. I don't know which is worse. But what you're also seeing is a new Hollywood come up. And if you were to ask me, I think that's going to be the future of the film industry. What you're seeing is actors going independent and making their own films. Keanu Reeves, he's been doing the John Wick films, basically, doing his own production company and creating his own world with it. He's basically gone independent to make those movies. He's not operating within the normal Hollywood sphere. Mel Gibson, I mentioned, he's operating outside of Hollywood. A lot of actors are going that route. Sylvester Stallone, he's been doing The Expendables, also kind of doing his own thing. You have a lot of them who've kind of broken away from that. Oh, by the way, another great guy who came out recently talking about his, his religious beliefs, came out as a Christian, actually is very vocal about it, Rob Schneider. I'm going to be speaking at an event with him in November. So I forgot to mention this. I'm going to be speaking, we're going to have a big gala, how do you say it? We're going to have a big gala in California in November. I'm going to be speaking there. Rob Schneider's the main speaker. Yanya Kellick from American Thought Leaders. Roman Balmakov from his show. forget the name of his show. And a few others of ours are going to be there. Facts matter, right? We're going to be speaking in California with Rob Schneider. So actually, I don't know if the tickets are on sale yet, but I'll keep you all updated on that. It's going to be a pretty good event. That's going to be, it'll be like mid-November. I'll keep you updated as we get closer to it. But on that point too, you're actually seeing a lot of conservatives and a lot of Christians be much more vocal in Hollywood. And I think that is having a big change. Also because of the way technology has changed. It used to be that if you wanted to make a Hollywood tier movie, special effects, camera equipment, audio equipment, it was very expensive. All of that now is attainable by the average person. You have people filming like Hollywood tier movies on their iPhones. The accessibility has been opened up much more, and it's way easier to make films now. And so you do have a lot of independent filmmakers. You have content creators doing films. I mean, I've done documentaries that are, kind of on that, within that community, I guess you could say. We've done like film premieres and so on. We've made films. Epoch Times has made movies. And so it's a lot more accessible. And I think you're going to see that side of the film industry become a lot bigger. Angel Studios also, you're going to see a lot more of that. James Dyson, you're saying, and one more point on it, it's also going to create new competition for Hollywood. And so this is the other way the market works because, hey, we still have a free country, right? Hollywood is going to have to compete with the new film industry. And if, Keanu Reeves and the John Wick films or Sylvester Stallone or Angel Studios or whatever else, if they are successful doing a certain type of film and Hollywood is doing the films that keep losing money, they're going to start having to compete with the other guys on the block. And they're going to have to make films that are capable of getting it, making the profit. And so they're going to start having to compete with that. I think you will watch a cultural change in films. And I think you're already seeing this start of it. James Dice, you're saying, Josh, what's up with the Chinese surveillance electronic chips in children's toys? James, they're everywhere. Okay, I was one of the early reporters talking about the Chinese Communist Party installing spyware in basically everything. I want to say I did a huge investigative article. I want to say it was back in like 2010 or 2011. If you want to look up my article on that, I think I called it "Is Your Iron Spying on You?" which it was, by the way. So the way that whole story started, there was a shipment of irons like you iron your clothes and electric kettles, and they were being sent to Russia from China. The customs officers noticed the weights were off. Hey, something's wrong. They opened up the boxes, actually took apart the electronics, and they found within the kettles and irons coming from China that somebody had installed these little chips. And what these chips did is if you plugged in the iron or the kettle, it would activate these chips and they would search for unprotected Wi-Fi. Like if you have open Wi-Fi, which I guess was more popular in Russia for some reason. I don't know why people don't put passwords in their Wi-Fi there. It would search for unprotected Wi-Fi, breach it, and then call home. And so it was like a way to compromise the internet infrastructure. They were doing that. And I noted in that piece other examples. I noted that Olympus picture frames. Everyone ever see those digital picture frames where like you can put a card in and it shows like animated videos, or it can change the picture from your family photos or something like that. There was malware discovered in those from China. Most Chinese phones also had malware. Anybody go on Amazon and try to search for a phone and you find all these weird off-brand phones? A lot of those are from China. The spyware on those, a lot of it was being done through infected apps. So they will have like pre-installed apps that work as basically spying devices for the Chinese Communist Party. And because it's installed on the firmware, which is like the soft, it's kind of like software, but it communicates between the chips and the hard. It communicates, it's kind of the go-between between the device you see and like the chips. You can't delete it, right? It's like the software on the chips themselves. And so a lot of these things are installed in the firmware. You can delete your phone, you can erase the whole thing, and it's not going to go away. And so there's like embedded threats. They had the same thing being discovered with USB sticks, even from name brands. Even if you were buying a name brand USB stick, there was Chinese malware on it. And if you plug it into your laptop or whatever else, it could infect your computer. And a big problem with that is because these companies, they manufacture these products in China. And when they manufacture it in China, apparently the manufacturers are putting malware in it. It happened with Chinese laptops, I mean, just random electronics, like everything. There's never been a full investigation on the government side into embedded threats from the Chinese Communist Party. The furthest they went, which was also terrifying, was when they were looking at embedded threats within U.S. military equipment, because there was a huge story came out around that time as well. I want to say 2011 or 2012, it was around then. The U.S. military did a review, and they found that they had counterfeit Chinese parts in most of our military equipment. There were counterfeit Chinese parts in the U.S. missile defense system. Imagine that, in our missile defense system. There were Chinese counterfeit parts in the tanks, including the Abrams tanks, or our wonderful tanks. There were Chinese counterfeit parts in our jets, in our helicopters, like everything. And they never really gave us clear answers on what those were. Were they just non-functional? Were they cheap knockoff parts that they were just buying because they were cheap? Were they spying devices? Were they things that could work as backdoors for remote access that could compromise our military in the event of a war? We never got answers on it. We never got answers on that. The Obama administration started a whole campaign to root out what they called supply chain threats. That was the politically correct term they used for it, supply chain threats in the U.S. military. Trump tried rooting it out. It didn't really happen because when Biden came in, they also tried rooting it out. We never really got updates on how far they went to root out those threats. But the problem of embedded threats from Chinese Communist Party manufacturers, and remember in China, there's no such thing as a real independent company. They all have to work for the CCP, and the CCP does it through the law. This is just the way things work. And the problem is we've allowed Chinese apps, we've allowed Chinese electronics, we've allowed Chinese parts, including the tiny parts that they put on like microchips and stuff like that, or not microchips, but like motherboards and things. All these things have had problems, and we still allow it. We still allow it. And that has never been properly dealt with. And I don't even really see investigations being done on this anymore. For a while, this was big on the side of like cybersecurity firms, but they don't really look at it anymore. So we don't even know how big it is. Another question, Judy Akeem, you're saying, looking at generational patterns, countries that have been the bedrock of global organized crime for generations are in a huge amount of trouble. You cannot come out of that situation without addressing the morality of the entire country. Judah, that's an important point. Because, it is true. Unfortunately, in some countries where you have gangs, cartels, gangs, mafias, that have been able to operate for long periods of time, it affects the culture of the country. You see this with many countries that have dealt with this. Terrorist groups, mafias, you do see that it affects the culture, especially if they're allowed to get very big. In Mexico now they have narco culture. It's in the music, it's in the entertainment, it's in the religion. They've even created narco saints where people are, I don't know how you do it, but they're praying to God and they're praying to like a skeleton, like Santa Muerta and stuff like that. It's infiltrated the religion, so they're actually praying to narco cults, actually under the guise of normal religion. How do you change that? Because the religion, the culture, the music, the movies, the entertainment, that's like your entire culture. That's the bedrock of your moral system. If your moral system is utterly compromised by criminality, evil, things like that, I don't know how you're going to fix it, as Judith noted, unless you address the problem of the morality in the entire country. I mean, there are some countries that have tried addressing this. through religious revivals. I believe that Russia has tried to do that through the Russian Orthodox Church. The problem you have with the Russian Orthodox Church is it's controlled by it was controlled by the Soviets, and it's maintained that type of control. They're technically a branch of the government, but they are trying to reinstitute some type of religious belief. And anything short of a movement to try to really restore religious integrity, I don't know how you're going to fix it. I think the only way you could fix it would be if the government outlaws drug culture, gang culture, narco culture, and has some kind of movement to encourage, like a religious movement. The problem is, how do you do that without having the religious movement tainted by politics, which is also just as problematic? So it's a very hard place to be. I'm a person who believes you cannot force people to be moral. I think, in my opinion, actually, if you force people to practice religion, you might have the opposite effect. You might turn people against it. And actually, I would say that oftentimes that happens. Oftentimes the people who force their religion on others, they cause harm to their religion. I think coercion and things like this do the opposite. And I think that's actually how you end up with really corrupt governments that operate as theocracies that in no way represent the actual religious values. Because if you create a power structure, people who desire power will gravitate towards that power structure, and they will corrupt otherwise good things. So, it's a real challenge on how do you bring back morality. I think people have to desire it. I think people need to want it. And how do you make people want it? It's a very tough issue, right? I think religious figures have been trying to do that for a long time. So, we'll see what happens. But it is a challenging issue. That said, I'll add one more point to Latin America. I think one of the big things that could be done to save Latin America from, narco culture, they're still very Catholic. The Catholic Church has not recognized the narco saints. I think if the Catholic Church came out and excommunicated people who follow narco saints or people who engage in that stuff, that could actually bring a lot of stability to that region. The other side is I don't think they want to go that far because, they're looking to keep people, not lose people. And so it's a very rough issue. It is a very, very rough issue. All right, everyone, that said, let me know what you think in the chat. How do you think it could be solved? What do you think could be done to bring back morality? Should we bring back the old paddles from the 80s? Do we need more of that? Did that have the opposite effect? Tell me in the chat. Or do you think, people are just going to naturally maybe gravitate back towards that? I do think that we are on the verge of a religious revival. I saw it with my own two eyes. Charlie Kirk is having an effect on that, actually. It's interesting. That said, let me know what you think in the chat. Also, please don't forget to share this episode. Help us get the word out. At least give us a like, right? And that said, I will see y'all again tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And until then, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.